Hello, and welcome to another episode of Movies, they're pretty good. I'm your host, Travis Dudding, and today we're going to talk about my personal favorite Christmas film, Frank Capra's 1946 masterpiece, It's a Wonderful Life. So, let's get right into it. We're opening on a narration of various prayers for a character, George Bailey. That's the main character, played by Jimmy Stewart. We just hear various people like, okay, like please pray, or please be with George, please pray for George. That's what they're doing. And we're just getting that there's a lot of people that like and care about this character. So after that, we cut to a couple of galaxies having a conversation. We can kind of gather that one of them is supposed to be God and the other is named Joseph. And they're saying like, oh, like poor George Bailey, like there's something needs to be done. Let's send someone down to help him out. And they decide to send one of the newer angels, Clarence, who doesn't have his wings yet, and this is going to be his mission to get his wings, because this is a concept that they talk about in the movie, how angels need to like work their way up to getting their wings, and then once they have their wings, they're at full power, basically. So we hear Clarence. They're like, okay, like this is your job, you're gonna go help this guy. He's thinking about ending his life. They say he's thinking about throwing away the greatest gift to man or something like that. And then he's like, oh, he's thinking of ending his life. Okay. So then in order to intervene, they're going Clarence needs to know as much as he can about George's life. So they basically are showing him flashbacks of George's life, like leading up to this moment, and which is perfect as a narrative device to show us, the audience, George's life leading up to this moment. So we see a bunch of kids sledding. They're going down a hill. They're using snow shovels as sleds, which is pretty, ingenious. They're going down the hill and they're sliding onto like a frozen pond. During this, we see young George. We see his brother as well, Harry Bailey. And when it's Harry's turn to go down, he slides too far and goes through the ice. And George saves his life, but we hear through narration that he gets an infection and basically ends up losing his hearing in his left ear. So then we cut to him at his job where he works for Mr. Gower. So he works at the pharmacy. He does deliveries. He works the counter, everything like that. And he's like a young kid. So this is like pre child labor laws and stuff like that. I mean, if the movie is set in 1946, then this is obviously way before. So lost my spot in the notes. And this is also where we're introduced to young Mary, who will end up, spoiler alert, being George's wife later in the movie. She's sitting at the counter, and then another young girl comes in named Violet, and she's kind of like a little flirty with George, and George is like not interested. He's not interested in either of them really at the moment. But at one point, when George is like leaning down to get like a scoop of ice cream for Mary, she leans over and like says into his left side, like the ear that he can't hear in, that she'll love him till the day that he dies, basically, or till the day I die. Either way. And then this is also when we see that Mr. Gower seems a little upset about something, and George clocks this. He then notices a telegram on the counter addressed to Mr. Gower, informing him that his son Robert has passed away due to, I think, pneumonia or the flu. Yeah, it was influenza. Yep. So George is like, okay, now I see why he's so upset. He goes into the back because Mr. Gower needs him to make a delivery of some pills to a customer. George notices, because Mr. Gower drops the pills, that he was using the wrong medicine, because he's all frazzled, obviously, because his son just died. So George is like, okay, like, he's trying to tell Mr. Gower he's not really listening because he's too distraught. So he is exiting the store, sees a sign that says, like, what is it? Oh yeah, ask Dad, he knows. So he's like, all right. Then he goes to his dad's office. His dad works at Bailey Brothers Building and Loan, and his dad's in the meeting with Mr. Potter, who is like the richest man in town, super greedy, the villain of the movie, played by Lionel Barrymore, Drew Barrymore's great grandfather, I think. And so he's trying to like find out, he's trying to like get some help from him, but his dad's obviously busy, but he's also in there while Mr. Potter's kind of like berating his dad and putting him down. And so George like stands up for him and everything, ends up leaving. And I think it's like, even though he didn't get any direct advice from his dad, he still like, I don't know, like learned it on his own pretty much. Like he had like the power to like stand up to Mr. Gower. Not that he like really needed to, but just like, hey, like, so he goes back to the shop. Mr. Gower's on the phone saying like, what do you mean? Like, I sent those pills out an hour ago. It should have been there. I'll get them there soon, you know? And then he starts yelling at George, ends up slapping him in the ear to where his ear starts bleeding. So, I mean, it was definitely a different time. So, I don't think you'd see too much of that now. And then also like later on still care about this character. But George says like, you did something wrong. Like, you put poison in those pills. Like they could have died. I know you didn't do it on purpose. I know you're upset. I know about your son. Like, I understand. Like, I'd be there too. And then Mr. Gower's like, he realizes like the error of his ways and apologizes to George and like gives him a hug. And he's like, oh, and then they're both like kind of cry together and everything. So it is like what could have easily been like a very terrible scene, like ends up on the lighter end. So moving on. Now we flash to George, all grown up. He's about to go on a trip to Europe, before starting college. So basically he just graduated. He's going to go to Europe and everything. He's at the store, picking up a suitcase. He wants to buy something big, and, the shop owner's like showing him this one, and he's like, nah, it needs to be like way bigger than that. And he pulls one out, and it's like, oh, there's this secondhand one. And he's like, oh, that's perfect. And he's like, how much? And then no charge. He's like, what do you mean no charge? And he's like, oh, Mr. Gower, your old boss, came and picked this one out for you. And then it even had his name monogrammed in it and everything. So super sweet. He goes over to Mr. Gower, thanks him and everything, and then heads back home. So during dinner, we find out that there's a school dance because of the graduation that night. I don't think he just graduated. I think it's Harry just graduated, the younger brother. But he's been working to save up to go on this trip and go to college, basically. So, but he's still going to go to the graduation dance that night and everything. So they're at the dance. We see Violet, the blonde girl from before, when they were little kids, is trying to dance with them, and he's about to, but then Mary's brother comes and he's like, hey, you remember my sister Mary? Like, I think you should dance with her. And so he goes and dances with her. Some guy's trying to talk to her and try to get her to dance. And she's just, you could tell she's like not interested, but she's being polite and everything. I'm pretty sure, I should have looked this up beforehand, but if I remember correctly, my dad told me that that's the original Alfalfa from Our Gang, like way back in the 30s and stuff. So, but yeah, so that guy's all upset, like, hey, like, you're stealing my date or whatever. But Mary's like immediately like, oh, it's George Bailey. Like, I've loved him since I was a kid. Like, of course I'm going to go dance with him. So they start dancing and everything. They're doing a Charleston competition basically. And, oh yeah. So we see that the nerdy guy is off to the side, kind of like sulking about losing his date and not getting to dance with Mary. Excuse me. And then someone comes up to him and it's like, hey, like, you jealous? And he's like, whatever. Like, hey, just so you know, like, there's a pool under the floor of the dance floor. And just so happens that the button to open the pool is right behind you. And it also happens that George Bailey is dancing right over the opening. And I just so happen to have the key here. So gives him the key, opens the, hits the button to open the pool, and then the floor starts to slowly open. And then, so people are noticing, except for George and Mary, who are still dancing and doing the Charleston and everything. And they keep like getting like closer and closer to the edge. And then people are like kind of screaming and cheering and everything like that. And they think that they're just like cheering them on. And then, a couple fake outs, and then they finally go over the edge and fall into the pool. And there's laughing and they're still dancing in the pool and everything. And then other kids start to jump in the pool. And then eventually even the, I don't know if it's a teacher or the principal, but one of the faculty decides like, oh, well, and then he dives in. So great scene. Love it. 1 second. So they're, George and Mary are walking home. They're singing a song like Buffalo Gals, Won't You Come Out Tonight and Dance by the Light of the Moon. They're having a great time. They're talking. They come across this old house. And then George is like, oh, like, you throw a window or throw a rock, and if you break something and make a wish, then that wish will come true, basically. So he throws a rock. Glass breaks. He makes a wish. That, is talking about how he wants to travel the world and everything like that. And then Mary throws it and then breaks even more and makes a wish, but she won't tell what it is. But she's also saying how she loves that old house, and like George is like, nah, that place is like hideous. It's abandoned, like all that stuff. And she's like, no, like, it's very charming and I really like that place. So they keep talking and everything. And then, there's a old man on his porch, like kind of eavesdropping on them, cause he lives next door to that, abandoned house. And, at one point he just kind of interrupts them. He's like, aren't you going to kiss her already? And then he's like, George is yelling back at him, and he's like, like, youth is wasted on people like you or something like that. And then like gets up and goes inside all grumpy. Mary goes to run away, but George is standing on the rope to her, or the sash to her robe, and it comes off. And so she is now completely naked, but like hiding in the bushes. And George realizes like, okay, like the robe's on the ground, like, and then she's like, oh, give it back to me. And he's just messing with her. Like, he can't see anything or anything. He's just kind of rambling on, like, joking with her. But during this, a car pulls up, and it's George's Uncle Billy saying, like, your dad had a stroke. Like, you need to come now. And he just tosses the robe onto the bushes. He's like, Mary, I got to go. I'm sorry. And then drives off. Cut to finding out that his dad died. George, I keep saying Harry. George had to cancel his Europe trip to be there to take care of like the estate and everything for the business, as well as like the funeral and everything. So he's about to like leave, get on a train, and go to college after this meeting. And but then he finds out that that they're basically going to close the business, and Mr. Potter wants to dissolve the company entirely. And he makes this big speech, like, you know, like, don't fall for this Mr. Potter guy. Like, he's just gonna have everyone like paying too much rent and everything like that, and it's gonna destroy the town and everything. I can't control like what happens, but basically, like, if you do this, then you're just destroying everything my dad built. But, you know, doesn't matter because I'm out of here. I'm going to college. See ya. And so as he's like saying goodbye to people out in the lobby of the business, then someone comes out and he's like, oh, the board members have decided to keep it open, and they're not going with Potter, but there's one catch, is that you have to run it. So basically he ends up sacrificing his college, sacrifice going to college, gives that money to his brother Harry, lets him go to college, and then runs the company, runs his dad's company, basically. So next, let me find my place in my notes again. Oh yeah, so cut to 4 years later. George is waiting at the train station, and Harry's coming home. And he's like, okay, like, Harry's coming home. Now he can run the business, and I can finally go to college and do all the stuff that I want to do. And then who does Harry have with him but his new wife, who has a father that has offered Harry a job. So George once again knows, like, even though Harry's trying to say, like, I know, like, I promised, like, I would come back, so I'm not necessarily taking that job. But George is like, also just such a nice guy that he's not going to be like, you know, like, that's a better job, you should take that job, and everything like that. So once again, like, sacrificing his own happiness and everything. So there's a party at the house celebrating that Harry's back from college and that he's married. So one funny part is that they're out on the porch. Uncle Billy comes out and he's just like completely drunk. But as he's like stumbling away, this is a piece of trivia that my dad was just telling me, that there's a sound of like, it sounds like trash cans like getting knocked over, and but what it really was someone on set dropped something, and during the take, and it sounded like, you know, crashing through trash cans, and the actor playing Uncle Billy ad-libbed, like, he was yelling off from the side that he fell over drunk into the trash cans. So save the take, everything. It's perfect. It's a good joke. It's good gag. Ugh, I'm tired. Oh yeah. So then his mom comes out and is talking to George, saying like, oh, did you hear that Mary's back in town? She got back from college too. So, I mean, I don't think they went to the same college, but, you know, they left at the same time. And so George is like, okay, like, I'm going to go visit her, and heads over there, but he's kind of like, just not really sure what he's doing with his life, you know, because he had like a plan, and that even though he's very happy for Harry, it's kind of like the plan's got to change now, no matter what. So, he's kind of hanging out in front of Mary's house, like contemplating whether he should go in or not. And she notices from the upper window, like, hey, like, your mom just called and said you were on your way over here. And he's trying to play it off like, oh no, I was just out for a walk. I didn't tell anyone I was coming here. But so she invites him in, goes inside. The she has a painting that she made of a something that he had said to her when during their walk after the dance and everything, and he said that he wanted to throw a lasso around the moon and pull it down and give it to her, basically. And so she has like a painting of that she wants to show him, but he's just so like has so much on his mind that he's not even like clocking like the romanticism of that or anything like that. And he's just kind of being like a jerk to her a little bit and just kind of like brushing off things that she's saying because he just is in shambles mentally at this point. And then the her mom's upstairs like yelling down like, oh, Sam Wainwright, who's another one of their classmates, is gonna call tonight, you know. And like I think he's interested in Mary, but Mary's not interested in Sam. She's only interested in George, you know, as she has been since she was a little girl. So the mom keeps saying like, what's George doing here? Like, get him out of here. Like, Sam's going to call any minute. And they're like, what's going on down there? And then she's just like, Mary says that he's, violently making love to me or making violent love to me, mother. And then she's just all like, oh, you know, like grabs her robe and goes to her room and everything. So then Sam finally does call while, George is like trying to leave. And, but then he ends up forgetting his hat, so he comes back in the house. But then Sam's on the phone and he wants to talk to George, and the mom's like, why are you calling George? Like he doesn't want to talk to him. And then Mary's like, no, like he literally just said like put George on the phone, and she's upstairs listening on the extension and everything. And basically he has this like offer that he's going to start investing or start producing plastics, and he wants them to invest. I think they end up turning him down, and the conversation basically ends with them hanging up the phone. They say like, no, we're not investing or whatever. Then he's like starts yelling at her like, I never want to get married to anybody, like I don't want to stay in this town, like all this stuff. But then just like breaks down crying, hugs her, and then like kisses her. Cut to them getting married like pretty much right away. But then as they're leaving for their honeymoon and driving away, they look and there's like a big crowd around the banks and stuff and the building and loan. And he's like, oh my gosh, like what's going on? It's a run on the bank because this is probably taking place during the Great Depression. And sure enough, big crowd outside the building and loan. Goes over there to kind of figure everything out. And Uncle Billy's in there with the door locked and everything. He's like locked everybody out, which is not what you're supposed to do. That's basically guaranteed death to your business at that point. Lets everybody in and just kind of like tries to talk them down. They're like, we want our money now. Uncle Billy tells George like, there's no money here. Like I literally had to go take all the money over to the bank, like all the cash that we had here. And that still wasn't enough to cover our debts and everything. Because, I mean, I don't really know like how it works in this situation, because I know they're not like a straight bank. They're a building and loan. It's like a loan place. And so he gives this speech to the people out there. It's like, hey, like, no, you can't just like come get your money. Like your money is in his house and his money is in this person's house and stuff like that. And you even signed when you got the loan from us that, it would take 60 days to get your money. And they're like, no, like we need it now. Because basically this would happen a lot during this time where, and I don't really know what would cause it, but people would just panic and try to get all their money out of the bank, you know, because the banks were failing. It was the Depression. But he's just trying to say like, hey, like this facility doesn't work like that. We don't have your money here right now. But then, Mr. Potter says like, hey, like I'll bail you guys out. I already bailed the bank out. I'll use my own money and I'll pay their loans for 50 cents on the dollar. So basically, he's going to like just give them half their money that they are owed. And George says no, but then someone comes in and is trying to get like the crowd, like, hey, like Potter's gonna give 50 cents on the dollar cash. And so some people are gonna go, and he's like, the one guy's like, oh, I'd rather get half than nothing. And no, I wouldn't, because I mean, in a desperate situation, yes, but like that money's still there and you're still owed that money. It's not going away. But so I'd rather not lose half of it. But then Mary sees like what's about to happen, and she's like, hey, I got cash. And she has like the honeymoon fund, $2,000. And so she's like, okay, this is her like kind of making the step, like, okay, like George won't do it this time, so I'm going to do it. And so they offer to pay out like, hey, like how much do you need right now to get you until the banks reopen? And that same guy before that was like, oh, I'd rather get half than nothing, he still wants his full $242. And everyone else is like, no, like just give me 20, that's enough to get me by, but that guy's just ridiculous. So yeah, basically they end up using their own money to bail everybody out. So they crowds die down. They close the doors right at 6 o'clock, because that's what Mr. Potter said. It's like, if you close before 6 p.m. tonight, then you'll never reopen. And then so they make it to 6 o'clock. They manage to help all the customers, and they still have $2 left. And then George is like, realizes like, oh, it's late. Like, supposed to be on train. Wait, train's off, definitely left. Where's Mary? Like, I need to find my wife. And then she's right at that moment, she's calling the building and loan. And like, George, like, Mrs. Bailey's on the phone. So she wants him to come home, and he's like, okay, like, well, where's home? Because they don't have a house yet. And she's like, gives him the address, like, I forget, it's like 300 something Sycamore Street. And so he gets a cab, he goes there, and it's the old house from their walk, like way earlier in the movie. And it's not fixed up yet, but you find out that she bought the house, and she's got a few of the townspeople there to like make it seem like it's a hotel. It's raining, the roof is leaking, there's posters of different like destinations like covering the windows because the windows are broken and all this stuff. And they just like try to make it like a honeymoon place in this like rundown house, but they bought the house and now they have a home and everything. So it's like a silver lining and like what could have easily been like a very disappointing day, and it just doesn't matter because they have each other. And so we see that cut to a little bit later, George has built like a neighborhood of like affordable homes for people. That way they don't have to like rent to Mr. Potter. And they call it Bailey Park. He's there at like the grand opening ceremony. He's giving this house to, well, I don't know, giving, but helping move in Martini, who owns he's an immigrant who owns the bar in town. Clever. Oh yeah, so Sam Wainwright's there, and he's like, oh, like, hey, like the plastics business is taking off, like you guys really should have invested, and he's like rich now and everything. And like he's being like fairly nice about it, but also, it just kind of, that's the last thing George wants to hear after he's literally given up everything except for that money to invest to like everybody else to help other people. So after Sam leaves, he's a little upset. What should be a good day, he's just like slamming the door and just like, man, just kind of a little defeated at this point. So Mr. Potter calls a meeting with George, because he basically is like running numbers and everything and seeing like, oh man, like George is selling these houses for half of what they're worth to these people if I had a stake in this or whatever, or if I could take over, if I could hire George, close his business, then I could, rent to these people and take advantage of them. And so he calls a meeting with George. He says, like, hey, like, I want to hire you. I want you to work for me. You'll have so much money. You'll never know what to do with it and all this stuff. But, in the end, George is like, no, like, I'm not going to do that. Like, no, I'm not going to work for you. He definitely toys with the idea, but just ends up doing the right thing and not taking the offer. Because all he's going to do is buy out the company and close it. That's all he really wants to do. So then he goes home. Mary tells him that she's pregnant, and he's happy. And then we get kind of a montage of World War II starts. They're refurbishing the house. He can't go because of his ear. Harry ends up going. Harry wins the Medal of Honor for saving a bunch of people and all this stuff. Then we cut to it's Christmas Eve. Harry's and the mom are in Washington, D.C. He's getting his medal, and then he's going to come home for Christmas and everything like that. Then we see Uncle Billy. He's going over to the bank to deposit $8,000 for the business, And while he's in there, he runs into Mr. Potter. And so he's like showing him the newspaper. He's like, look, like, you always say that the Baileys are good for nothing, but he won the Medal of Honor and all this, and just kind of like shoving it in his face. Well, during that, like, because he picks up the newspaper and he's holding it with the same hand that he's holding the envelope full of $8,000 in cash. And during this moment, ends up giving the newspaper back to Mr. Potter along with the envelope. So he doesn't realize till he's at the window making a deposit, and the banker's like, aren't you forgetting something? Like, usually when you make a deposit, like, there's cash involved. And he's like, oh, like, he's just checking his pockets and he just can't find the envelope anywhere. He starts freaking out. He doesn't remember that he had it in his hand when he gave him the newspaper and everything. Mr. Potter gets into his office, opens the newspaper, and being the greedy old man that he is, doesn't say anything about it. He's just like, well, this is mine now. Can't wait to watch this business fail. And so then Uncle Billy's freaking out, obviously. He tells George, like, what happened. George is at the office. So is the bank examiner there to, like, do an audit on them. And, perfect timing, of course. And George, like, goes with Uncle Billy to his house. They retrace his steps, all this stuff. And obviously they don't find it because Mr. Potter has it. And so at the end of the search, he just ends up like kind of berating Uncle Billy and just calls him like a drunken fool and stuff. He leaves. Uncle Billy's there. He starts crying, because, it's his fault. It is, it was an accident, but in the end, it like really is. And, well, technically, I guess it's Mr. Potter's fault because he has it, knows where it came from, is doing the wrong thing. But, and so George goes home. He now has 4 kids. That does get talked about in the montage. Now he ended up with 4 kids, 2 boys, 2 girls. Mary's decorating because there's going to be a Christmas party that night. The older daughter is practicing on the piano. I forget her name. I forget most of the kids. I only know one kid's name, Zuzu, and she's the one who's sick upstairs. I think there's a Tommy, but I could be wrong. But none of their names get said quite as much as Zuzu, and that will come later why. So he's there. He's visibly agitated. Everyone can tell like there's something wrong. But depending on how old of a kid you are, you're not really going to pick up on stuff, and you're still just going to be like, you know, bugging your dad and stuff like that and asking questions and everything. He goes upstairs to visit Zuzu because she's sick in bed. She got sent home from school, but she forgot her coat, and, you know, now she's running 99-degree temperature, you know, so very low grade fever, but, you know, definitely sit in bed till you feel better, you know, don't make it worse. So he goes up there and is talking to her. She has like a paper flower, or maybe is it paper flower or just a real flower? I don't remember. But either way, she's got this flower, but some of the petals came off, and she wants her dad to fix it. He kind of does like a good trick of like kind of turning to the side, taking the broken petals and stuffing them into his pocket, like where she can't see, and then brings it back to her because, you know, she's not going to notice. She didn't count the petals. So yeah, he goes back downstairs, just ends up snapping, and like he has like these models because he always wanted to be an architect and design cities and things like that. And there's models of buildings and bridges that presumably he made at some point, just kind of daydreaming or whatever, because, you know, maybe someday he will still get to do that. And just is looking at it, snaps, knocks over all the models, kicks over the tables, everything like that. Starts yelling at the kids, like yells at the daughter playing the piano, like, how many times are you going to play that song and all this stuff. And, you know, the kids start crying. He realizes like, oh my God, like, why am I doing this? Why am I taking it out on them? Ends up leaving. As soon as he leaves though, Mary's like, all right, like, let me call Uncle Billy, see what's going on, because George isn't telling me what's going on. The kids are like, should we pray for Daddy? Yes, like, he's going to need all the prayers he can get, basically, is what Mary says. So after he leaves, he goes to Mr. Potter to beg him for help. Like, hey, like, this is what happened. I lost this $8,000, and, like, I just need help. Like, you know, it's not a discrepancy in the numbers. It's just the physical money is misplaced, you know. Mr. Potter's just like, nope, like, because he knows the truth and is just like gonna use it to his advantage. So he's like, no, like, I'm not helping you. I'm using this opportunity to make sure you close for good, and says that he's gonna call the district attorney and everything like that. And so George leaves, heads to the bar. He's there drinking. And he starts to pray like, God, like, I know I'm not a praying man, but just like, I need help, you know? And, either Martini or Nick, like one of the two. Cause Martini's the bar owner. Nick is like the head bartender. They're like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, you know, and at some point, like, hey, Mr. Bailey, and someone down the bar hears, Bailey, which Bailey? Like, and this is George Bailey. And earlier, the Zuzu's teacher had called to make sure she was okay. George picks up the phone and yells at her, and just like, what do you, like, how stupid are you to send a kid home with no jacket and all this stuff? She's sick. She's probably going to get a pneumonia because of you. And just like is yelling and yelling and yelling at her. And she ends up like hanging up and crying, and the husband picks up and yells at George and all this stuff. So the guy that overhears that George Bailey is at this bar is the teacher's husband. And so he just decks him in the face, you know, punches him to the ground. And he's like, it's like, what do you get off like yelling at my wife? Like, she cried for an hour after talking to you, after you yelled at her. And it's like, she's tired of teaching your stupid kids and all this stuff. And, you know, like, she works so hard. And then he gets thrown out of the bar by the other guy. Like, hey, like, Martini's like, that's my best friend, George Bailey. Like, you don't hit him. Like, you're out of here. You're never coming back again. And all this stuff. So eventually, George gets up and he's like, okay, like, I'm out of here. And they're like, no, like, you shouldn't go like this. Like, you should rest for a little bit, because he's drunk and he's stumbling a little bit. So, but he's just like insistent. He's like, no, like, I'm going. Gets in his car, crashes into a tree. But, this is the 40s, so the cars weren't going that fast. And he stumbles out. The guy whose house it is, like, comes out and yells at him, like, hey, like, what are you doing? Like, my great grandfather planted that tree, his oldest tree here, and like, why are you leaving your car here? Like, you drunk fool, like, all this stuff. But George is just like, had enough, and he's just stumbling away. Comes to this bridge. He's looking over the edge and everything. And then we see that there's someone watching him, and it's Clarence. He's kind of watching him from also on the bridge, and Clarence decides to jump in, and which gets George's attention because he gets in there. He's like flailing around in the water, like, help, help. And then George jumps in to save him and everything. And then we see them like warming up inside of the, like, I don't know, guard shack or something, some kind of like facility. And there's a guy in there that's like gave him blankets and stuff and is helping him warm up on the fire and everything like that. And they're getting dressed, and Clarence is like mentioning stuff, and the George is like still too out of it to like pick up on these like various things that he's saying, but Clarence is like blatantly saying like, oh, like, I'm an angel, and all this stuff, and like, oh, like, your clothes are weird is what the guy says. And then he's like, oh, like, yeah, I got this on my last birthday and I was buried in it, and because he's got these like frilly clothes and everything because he's from like at least 100 years ago. And he's like talking to George, like, well, like, I'm glad you didn't go through with it. And he's like, go through with what? He's like, well, you were going to kill yourself, like, weren't you? And I jumped in there to save you, And the guard is like, hey, it's against the law to commit suicide around here. And but then they're still talking, and George is like, like, everything would be better off if I was never born. And Clarence is like, okay, like, if that's what you want, like, I can show you, like, and like what it's like if you were never born. And he's like, just like that, like, you were never born. And then so they go to leave and everything. They go to find his car, which of course is not there because he didn't exist to crash it. He even talked to the neighbor, and the guy's like, what are you, not the neighbor, but the guy whose tree they crashed into. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, you're drunk, like, get out of here. Then, oh yeah. And at one point he said, oh, this is the oldest tree in Pottersville. And George is like, Pottersville? Like, what are you talking about? It's like, yeah, like, this is Pottersville. Like, it has been for years, And, so they go to the bar. He's like, okay, maybe I left the car at the bar, and I'm just like, was too drunk to remember that. And I dreamt that I crashed into a tree. They go in there, they're talking to Nick, and he's like, hey, like, I know I was here earlier. And Nick's like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know who you are. And he's like, where's Martini? And he's like, who? He has no idea who Martini is. And he's like, I'm the owner of this place. Like, and, Nick's like overhearing like their conversation about Clarence being an angel and stuff like that. And at some point he's had enough, and he's like, all right, out you two pixies go. And then kicks him out of the bar, and they get thrown out into the snow. But before that happens, Mr. Gower comes in. But he's just like completely out of it, super drunk and everything like that. Nick's like, he's getting like bullied and stuff. Nick like splashes him in the face with like a seltzer bottle, or squirts him in the face. And then he's like, hey, like, what are you doing? Like, that's Mr. Gower. And he's like, well, you see, and Nick's like, see, there's another reason I don't like you. That guy, or that Rummy or something like that, so said that he spent 20 years in jail for poisoning a kid. So that goes to show that since George wasn't around, he wasn't there to stop him from giving those pills out, and a kid ended up dying. So George runs downtown. He's seeing all these signs, and it's all these bars and strip clubs and all this stuff, and like it's just completely different than it ever was before because Potter took it over. And he sees Violet getting arrested. She's like screaming and like resisting arrest and all this stuff. He runs to his house, or tries to go to his house, takes a cab there, and he's like talking to Ernie, and Ernie's like, I don't know who you are, man. Ernie flags down the cop and is like, hey, like I got a weird one back here, but still takes him over to the house. Of course, it's still run down because they didn't buy it and fix it up. And then at some point, like when they're like, all right, buddy, like it's time to get out of here. And George is like, Bert, Ernie, like you're my friends. And I just do think it is funny. Like it took me forever to realize that that those two were named Bert and Ernie. So they try to arrest him. George runs away. Clarence, or Bert, the cop, has him on the ground, has Clarence, and Clarence is like, Joseph, help me, to the other angel. And Clarence disappears like right in the hands of Bert. And so he's freaking out. And, but they get away. They head over to the, what used to be Bailey Park, like the neighborhood that George built. And it's just a cemetery, which makes me think like, because there's a lot of headstones there. So did George like pave over a cemetery to build that like low income housing? Because that's pretty messed up if he did, but I have no idea. But there he finds Harry's headstone, and that Harry died when he was 9 because George wasn't there to save him. And George is like, what are you talking about? Like, Harry's a war hero. He saved like a transport full of people. And Clarence is like, no, like all those people in that transport died because Harry wasn't there to save them, because you weren't there to save Harry. He's just trying to really drive that point home, like how much of an impact one person can have, and that, which is the whole point of the movie. So, and he's just like, all right, like, where's Mary though? Like, I have to see Mary. And Clarence is like, I'm not supposed to tell you. And he's like, come on, Clarence, like, please, like, I have to like see her. And he's like, you're not going to like it. And basically like, she never married, like said that she's an old maid, which is kind of funny. It's like the worst thing you could ever be as a woman is unmarried, which just goes to show you like how old fashioned it is. I think that's like that's in my opinion the one flaw of the movie. I know I'm not alone in that. It's an otherwise perfect movie, but that's like where it's just kind of like, oh, okay, like there's worse things that could have happened to her, like literally, and they could have logicked their way into making anything else like happen to her, but that's just all they did. Like the worst thing ever, an unmarried woman. So, oh yeah, he does end up going back to his mom's house first. Before that, I forgot about that. And it's a boarding house, like his dad still died and everything. And she's like, I don't know who you are, what are you doing here? Like, we don't have any rooms, we're full. And she's like, well, like, what about like Uncle Billy, like your brother-in-law? And it's like, what? Like, it's like, when did you talk to him last? And he's like, what? Like this morning, duh. And she's like, well, that's how I know you're lying, because he's been in an insane asylum for years, So, Uncle Billy's in an insane asylum. Harry's dead, all that stuff. Like his mom just, lost a kid, lost her one son really young, and lost her husband. And now she's just running a boarding house and is just a grumpy old woman. So he does go find Mary. She's at the library, the other worst thing that can happen to a woman is working at a library, apparently. She's like wearing glasses and stuff. So somehow like George being in her life made her vision better, I guess. And then like they purposely make her look all like like bland and everything. And so he's like, Mary is, she's like, who's this strange man like yelling at me? And so she starts running away. She runs into some like restaurant or bar or something. George runs in there and is like, it's like, Mary. And then she just starts like screaming and like, get him away from me. And he's like, hey, like, that's my wife. And then she like screams and faints like once he says that. And which is also just funny and weird. So he takes off running out of this place. Bert, the cop, sees him running and just starts opening fire at him, like as he's running through a crowded town square. So, oh my gosh, it's just insane. But yeah, at this point, he's just like, no, like, this isn't right. He runs back to the bridge and he's just begging Clarence. He's like, Clarence, please, like, I'm sorry, like, I'll change, like, whatever. Like, I want my old life back. I'm glad I was born. I wish I was born, all this stuff. As he's there crying on the bridge, car pulls up. Bert gets out, the cop, and is like, George, like, we've been looking for you. And so, like, George is like, what? Like, you know who I am? Like, all this stuff. And so he's like, super happy. He runs home. He's running home. He's running through town. He's so happy to see all the old businesses there. He's like, Merry Christmas, Bedford Falls. Merry Christmas, you old building and loan. All just naming out all the businesses and saying Merry Christmas to all the people. He pounds on Mr. Potter's window and says, Merry Christmas to you, Mr. Potter. Mr. Potter's like, oh, like, Happy New Year to you in jail or whatever, even though he couldn't hear him because he already ran off. So he runs home. The bank examiner's there, like a reporter with the cameras there. I think the DA's there and with like a warrant for his arrest and everything. And he's like, oh, Mr. Bank Examiner, like, and he's just like being all nice to them. And he's like, oh, like, I assume you have a warrant for my arrest. Like, okay, like, I'm going to jail tonight. And he's all like happy about it. Goes upstairs. He hugs his kids, gives them, kisses and everything. He's just like giving them this big hug. And he's like so happy to see them. Mary comes home and she's like, oh, like, George, like, I'm so happy to see you. Like, everyone's on their way. And he's like, what are you talking about? And she just like clears off this like card folding table. And then in come people. It's Uncle Billy carrying this like giant basket and he just dumps it on the table and it's just full of cash. And like the whole town just like, they got word that like George was in trouble and they all like pitched in to like bail him out because he had bailed them out like back when the run on the bank was happening. And just like everyone in town is coming and even the bank examiner puts down money and the DA puts down money and he rips up the warrant and everything. And they're all singing Old Lang Syne. Harry comes home, like he made it home. He flew home himself, cause he's a, war pilot or military pilot, war pilot. Yeah. And then, and then there's a telegram from Sam Wainwright in London. And he's like, hey, like Mr. Gower told me you needed money. And I've instructed my business to wire you up to $25,000 and, Merry Christmas. And then when Harry comes in, he like proposes a toast and he says, to my big brother George, the richest man in town. And then they sing Old Lang Syne. I'm crying. He looks on the tree. There's a book and it's Clarence's book. It's like a first edition of Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer, one of the two. And there's a message in there to him. And then like Mary's like, who's that from? He's like, oh, it's from an old friend. And then bell rings on the tree. And then Susan's like, teacher says every time a bell rings, an angel gets its wings. And like, then you just know that Clarence got his wings and that, he got a happy ending and George gets a happy ending and everyone but Mr. Potter gets a happy ending. And that's the way it should be. And that is like why, oh man, it's just that end scene is so good. And I love the message behind it because it's very easy, and not that everyone has such an extreme impact on the world like this example in this movie, but it's very easy to not realize what an impact you have on other people's lives. And it's very easy to be like, oh, it's better if I wasn't born or anything like that. And I'd say except for in extremely rare cases, that's never the case, And it's just a beautiful message. It's a beautiful movie. And it's a wonderful life. So, yeah. So before I get too worked up thinking about that, thank you guys for watching or listening, whichever you're doing. I hope you stay tuned for two more Christmas episodes for this year. And yeah, be sure to follow on Instagram at Movies They're Pretty Good. That's also the name of the YouTube channel. If you're listening and would like to watch, there should be a link in the show notes to a couple of those things. So you should be able to find everything on there or on the podcast website. But Instagram is where I'm the most active, and that's where I post what the next movie is going to be and where you could watch it. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't, please subscribe, like the video, rate the podcast if you're listening. Everything helps, just everything. Spread the word if you know someone else that might be interested in it. I understand if you don't, just if you think they might like it, So once again, thank you guys, and see you next week. Thanks. Bye.